A neocon is a group of true believers starting that really rose to force in the last years of Bush Sr. It was Cheney, Wolfowitz, Rumsfeld, but it became absolutely bipartisan. Victoria Nuland is kind of the ultimate.
Yes.
Her husband,
Bob Kagan.
Robert Kagan, is kind of the public intellectual of the neocons. I mean, he is. He is.
I know Bob well.
Yes.
He's an idiot.
Yeah, well,
he's your public intellectual.
He's the guy that writes the tomes that
But he's
say,
a child.
I think that this has been just about the most disastrous foreign policy imaginable. How can you go from peace in 1991, when you have a chance for creating a peaceful, cooperative world that could actually be prosperous and do good things together, to this mess that we're in? It took a strategy so stupid, so reckless, so blind, and that's what the neocons gave us. They gave us a strategy which said, we now run the world. And explicitly, we will be the world's policemen. We will fight the wars that we need to fight whenever and wherever we need to fight them. We will make sure that there's never a rival. Well, you do that long enough, you end up in lots of absolutely destructive, stupid wars. And the rest of the world doesn't just sit back and say, oh, thank you, U.S., we're so grateful you're the leader. They say, come on. You're 4.1% of the world population. There's another 95.9% of the world population that actually would just like peace and some cooperation, and not you to be telling us what to do. So this strategy was explicit, clear, adopted in the last years of basically in 1991, 92, after the Soviet Union was dissolved in December 1991. Clinton is just not serious, consequent, or experienced enough. He wasn't a rigid neocon, but Madeleine Albright was a true believer, and Clinton drifted in that direction. And that's also partly something to understand, which is when you have the biggest military machine in the world, when you are so powerful, the war machine is always revving. There's always some case for war. The neocons basically said, yeah, we're the policemen, we're the constabulary. This is our duty. And said you have to be in each of these conflicts because U.S. reputation also depends on this. So they invited regional wars and everywhere and all the time, and believed, of course, we could clean out governments we didn't want, regime change by war, by covert operations, and so on. And it became not a little movement, it became the dominant drive. So Clinton kind of drifted. His administration was divided between Madeleine Albright and Holbrooke on one side and William Perry on the other side, but he went with Albright. By the end of Clinton's term was NATO enlargement, bombing of Belgrade, and we were kind of off to the races. Then came Bush Jr., 9/11, global war on terror, but basically 9/11 as the opportunity to implement the project for the new American century, which is the document that defines the neocon agenda. And it's such an interesting document because very clear, it was very carefully studied, and it's also important to understand the U.S. is a big ship, so it doesn't turn quick, so you prepare a path, or it's this stuck rudder, as I said. And you can read in Rebuilding America's Defenses, which was a kind of campaign document for the incoming Bush Jr. administration, what we should do. And it defines this neocon agenda. So Bush Jr. introduced all of these things, the unilateral withdrawal from ABM, the war in Iraq, the expansion of NATO to 7 more countries, the commitment to expand NATO to Ukraine and Georgia. Then comes Obama. You don't think of him as a neocon especially, but who becomes the point person for Eastern Europe and Ukraine, Victoria Nuland. So interesting. Victoria Nuland was the Deputy National Security Advisor of Cheney.
I remember very well.
Yes. So she was Cheney's advisor. Then she was George W.'s ambassador to NATO during the commitment to enlargement. And if Obama weren't a neocon, you would say, well, that's not someone I'm going to hire. But all of a sudden, she lands as Hillary's assistant. Now, Hillary's absolutely neocon to the core, and there's Victoria Nuland, and she goes from being Hillary's assistant to becoming Assistant Secretary of State for European Affairs, and becomes the point person in the overthrow of Yanukovych at the end of 2013 and early 2014. And Obama is not, he's also very inexperienced in obviously no experience at all in foreign policy, but he wasn't by nature a neocon, but the system keeps you moving unless you're a president that knows how to keep a foot on the brakes. And we haven't had many presidents like that. Eisenhower was one who knew how to put his foot on the brakes because he really understood this system. John Kennedy learned it, but only after the Bay of Pigs, and probably was killed by our government for trying to keep his foot on the brakes. And there have not been many other occasions when presidents kept their foot on the brakes. So in 2011, Obama does the absolute neocon play of saying, almost out of the blue, by the way, why don't we overthrow Bashar al-Assad, Syria's president? Well, that's a little damn weird, but suddenly you start hearing Assad must go. I was on Morning Joe when that statement by Hillary was made, and Joe Scarborough looked at me and said, Jeff, what do you think? And I said, well, how are they going to do that? That sounds like another pretty stupid idea. And it turned out that was 2011. We've had 13 years of war in Syria, hundreds of thousands dead.
Destroyed the country.
Of course, destroyed the country. And who's president? Bashar al-Assad. And interestingly, I can tell you, I can tell you. In 2012, the U.S., there were protests, there were things that were going on in Syria, but the president said, okay, we'll send in the CIA to overthrow the government in Syria. And if anyone is wondering, we do this dozens of times, so don't have any illusion that this is unusual. It is the job, the terms of reference of the CIA to overthrow governments in other countries. I don't approve. I think it leads to war, destruction. It hasn't passed Putin's notice that that's the job of the CIA, so it's another reason he doesn't exactly want the U.S. on his border and so forth. Okay, so we start arming the jihadists, crazy things in Syria. Yeah, I can say it. I'm just thinking because... and the U.S. says Assad must go. So the UN starts a diplomatic process to try to find peace, which is the job of the UN. It's not to implement U.S. regime change. It's to try to find peace. So the UN succeeds in getting all of the parties to agree to a peace agreement, except one, the U.S. So the idea that you couldn't find peace, you couldn't find all these different factions in Syria. There was an agreement reached, but there was one obstacle to the agreement, and the obstacle was the U.S. said on the first day of this agreement, Assad must go, and the response was, why don't you have it a process. There'll be in 2 years an election or 3 years. Don't overthrow the government the first day. We have all this in place. And Obama, well, I don't know if it's Obama, probably Hillary, but whatever, said no. So that's why there was no agreement.
But what was the motive? Like, why would you want to overthrow Bashar al-Assad?
Very strange. I've never heard an absolute intelligent reason for this. Believe me, their idea is we can do it. Why not? One argument was that the neocons had a list. And this is actually what Wesley Clark, who was, NATO's supreme commander in the end of the 1990s. I know Wesley quite well, and he's also spoken about this. He said the neocons had a list that they were going to clear out in the 2000s all of the governments aligned with the Soviet Union or with Russia. Now, Russia has a naval base on the Mediterranean.
Yes.
And so Assad is therefore an enemy, or not an enemy. He doesn't rise to the level of being an enemy. He's someone whose piece you can take off the board and put in your own piece. That's all. So the idea is incredible arrogance. They don't think, honest to God, I don't know, whoever gave that order knew nothing about Syria. That I can guarantee you.
But the downstream effects of that were horrifying.
Well, unbelievable.
Well, created ISIS. So
yeah, but we probably created ISIS pretty directly because we funded jihadists all along the way. That's our story since 1979, actually.
Yes.
So this goes back a long time. They're not clever. They're not honest. They're not transparent. They are arrogant to the hilt. And they don't talk to anybody else, including to us, the American people, including to Congress, including to counterparts in other countries. And it gets you into trouble when you're so flippant and flagrant. Because remember, what was happening in Syria, they did exactly the same thing in Libya. And you look at Libya, they decided to take out Gaddafi. Why? No one really knows.
He was cooperating with us at that point.
No one knows because some people say Sarkozy, that Gaddafi had contributed to Sarkozy's campaign, that it was a personal vendetta. There are 100 theories. The fact that there are 100 theories shows that the whole thing was bullshit, to use a technical diplomatic term. You cannot even know right now why. What you know is that they misused a UN Security Council resolution to protect the people of Benghazi to launch a months-long NATO aerial bombardment of Libya until they brought down the government, unleashed war in Africa for the next 13 years until today, which is still roiling all of the countries of the region. They do these things because they can. Because it doesn't count. Maybe another theory, which is maybe true. What difference? It's money. It's a business. We're running a business. We're trying weapons. We're doing this. Maybe it's all a success from somebody's point of view that you have all these wars going with this big military machine. I don't know. That is a theory which is not completely dismissible. Because what you can't do, Tucker, is look and say, my God, we had a geopolitical reason to do this. This was really part of American security. We really needed to overthrow Assad. We really needed to take out Gaddafi, because if we didn't do that, something else would happen. You cannot even concoct a crazy narrative ex post that explains that. So these are not deeply explicable facts.
But the pattern is recognizable immediately. Here you have a country with unchallenged power starting wars for not any obvious reason all over the world. When was the last time an empire did that?
The British. That was the last time. I think we learned everything from the British. They were nonstop wars, skirmishes. When you're an empire, And if anyone still plays Risk, I don't know. I played it 60 years ago, I have to admit. So I'm not sure if people still play the game. But Risk, you're trying to get your piece on every part of the board. When you have your piece someplace on the board, if the neighboring spots are not yours, you better have wars with them or they're going to take you out. And so every place becomes an object for war because it becomes next door to wherever you have your bases, your concern, and so on. So we have military bases in, I would say, 80 countries probably, something like that. Of course, the count is not public, so people put together their own lists. We have about 750 military bases around the world. Each of those places has a neighborhood. Each of those places has the next door, which, oh, well, we don't have a base there. We better have a base there. And so that's the logic, which is if you're at the outer end of this, well, you better continue because otherwise your outer limit is what we don't learn. Actually, it's another analogy which I found to be useful. The Romans, by around 110 AD, with Hadrian, said, and Trajan, okay, we've reached a good limit.
Yeah.
And they stopped trying to expand.
Yep, they built a wall.
Right.
They kind of left it there.
Exactly. And they said there was a war that I find analogous to Ukraine. They had a war in Germania, so-called, east of the Rhine, in what is now Germany, in 9 AD. Which was a war of expansion by Augustus to tame the German tribes. And they lost that war. It's the War of the Teutoburg Forest, and they lost that war in 9 AD. They basically decided after that, not entirely, they didn't say, well, this is the end of the Roman Empire. They said, okay, we'll just leave Germania.
Yeah, there are limits to our power.
Right, there are limits, and that's fine. Why don't we behave like that? We're not threatened by Russia. We are not threatened by Russia. And Ukraine being neutral is not a threat to U.S. security. It builds U.S. security, period. That's what I said to Jake Sullivan. It's not even a concession, Jake. It's a benefit for us. Leave some space between you and them. That's what we want, some space so we don't have an accidental tripwire. That's the real logic of this world. Give a little space.
Yes.
We don't have to be everywhere. We're not playing Risk. We're trying to run our lives. We're trying to keep our children safe. We're not trying to own every part of the world.
So, speaking of increasing our risk, I think the unstated but very clear objective of all of this is to kill Putin and replace him and break up Russia. That's my read on it.
If you read even this project for a new American century, rebuilding America's defenses, it says maybe Russia will be decentralized into a European Russia, Central Asian Russia, a Siberian Russia, they call it, and a Far East Russia. This is essentially what you're saying. They talk, there's even some commissions in Washington decolonizing Russia. Their hope, the CIA's hope, if they would ever tell us the truth about anything, was, but they don't get any of this right, but their thought probably in this deep long-term vision was after the Soviet Union fell, so too will Russia disintegrate. It will disintegrate along its ethnic lines. It will disintegrate along its geographic lines. Why is that a U.S. project? It's a U.S. project only because, from my point of view, the U.S. resents that there is a country of 11 time zones, and it's so big that it is, on its face, a denial of U.S. global hegemony. In other words, how obnoxious of them to be there. Because
but the problem is,
they don't see it that way.
But just if you're looking at this purely through the lens of like what's good for us, like U.S. interests, which I do think is their job, actually.
Yes.
But chaos across 11 time zones and innumerable ethnic groups and religious divisions with 6,000 nuclear warheads. That's really a threat to the world.
I couldn't agree more.
Is it not? Am I missing something?
No, you're not missing anything. And the fact of the matter is, I was an advisor to Gorbachev in 1990, 91. I got to watch close up. I was an advisor to President Yeltsin in 1991, 1992. It's literally true, as weird as this sounds. Maybe not to you. You're about the one person for whom it's not weird. I sat in the Kremlin, sitting across from Yeltsin the day the Soviet Union ended.
Wow.
In a really, not even quite that day, literally. It was even more remarkable and bizarre than that. I was leading a little economics delegation to talk about the collapse of the economy that was underway. And Yeltsin came from the back of the room in one of these giant Kremlin rooms.
Yes.
And walked across the long room and sat down right in front of me and said, "Gentlemen, I want to tell you the Soviet Union is over."
That's incredible.
Like that. And then he pointed to the back door. He said, "Do you know who is in that room over there? It's the leaders of the Soviet military, and they have just agreed to the dissolution of the Soviet Union." And that was the first words I heard out of his mouth, sitting directly across from me. So,
what a moment.
Yeah, that was, of course, the most unbelievable moment I've had. And you're sitting in the Kremlin and you hear that suddenly. And then he went on to say, he spoke very beautifully for a few minutes. What does Russia want? And he must have used the word normal 10 times in that short speech. We want to be a normal country. We're done with the communism. We want to be normal. We want to be friendly. We want to be part of Europe. We want to be part of the world economy. We want to be normal. Mr. Sachs, can you help us be normal? And I said, "Mr. President, the world will be so grateful for this opportunity for peace that I am absolutely sure that the United States and the rest of the world is going to come to your assistance." And I said this most remarkably wrong fact because I believed it. I knew that that was America's interest. I believed we would follow our interest. And I had had a very unusual experience, wonderful experience 2 years earlier when I served as Poland's main outside economic advisor, helping them to develop the plan for becoming a market economy and part of Europe. And in those days, I helped Poland raise many billions of dollars of emergency support to stabilize a very shaky, unstable economy. And in those days, in 1989, everything I recommended was adopted by the United States government almost immediately. I thought, hey, I'm pretty good. I once went in one morning to Senator Dole and I said, Poland needs $1 billion to stabilize its currency. And he said, Mr. Sachs, come back in an hour. And I came back in an hour and there was Brent Scowcroft and our national security advisor. Senator Dole said, you know who this is, Mr. Sachs. I said, General, it's an honor to meet you. And Scowcroft said, what is it? What's your idea? And I handed him my one page about $1 billion. And he looked and he said, will this work, Mr. Sachs? And I said, I think this is the right way to stabilize the currency. He said, we'll get back to you. And at 5 p.m., as Dole asked me, I called Dole and he said, tell your friends they have their $1 billion within 8 hours, basically.
Amazing.
Okay, so I said to Yeltsin, this will be great. You're going to get all the support. We're going to go mobilize a financial package for you. We're going to help you stabilize the ruble. We're going to get a stabilization fund for the ruble. We're going to get this and that. And of course, every single thing I recommended that had worked in Poland, they rejected in Washington. And I just, for the life of me, what the hell is going on here? Stabilization fund. It worked. The zloty was stable. The Polish currency stabilized. No, Mr. Sachs, I'm afraid we don't support that. And one after another knocked down. So I did not understand the geopolitics that I was in at all. I didn't get it. I said, are you kidding? They want normal. They want peace. This is our greatest moment. This is the greatest moment of the second half of the 20th century. The scourge of nuclear war has been lifted. The Cold War is over. Do something. No. So that's it.
What do you make of Putin?
He's very smart. He has led Russia very effectively. And because he emerged from the KGB, he understands the U.S., the way the U.S. operates, because we became a security state. We became a state where the CIA has absolutely extraordinary influence, and Putin gets that. And so he really understands how we operate. He doesn't like it, but he understands it. And his background, especially because his background comes from the KGB, his counterpart was the CIA. He does not have illusions about the United States. And I wish we were proving him wrong.